Hello, my name is Gary Mansfield, and this is the Ministry of Arts podcast, where each week I'll be speaking to a different artist. Now let's begin by bagging these bongos.
Yeah, right. Crazy.
Hello, and welcome to episode 230 of the Ministry of Arts podcast. Well, last week's episode that featured Junior Tomlin was the last in the series of the Kensington and Chelsea Art Week and Art Trail podcasts. Now, the Kensington and Chelsea Art Trail is still on. It's on until the end of the month. So if you're in London, you want a day out to see some amazing artwork in some really beautiful locations, then go over to the Kensington and Chelsea Art Week's Instagram profile, which is KCAW London, and you'll find all the information there that you need. Last week we said goodbye to a punk icon, which was Jamie Reid, famous for putting a safety pin through the Queen's nose, or the Sex Pistols album cover, Never Mind the Bollocks, and oh so much more. If you're a long time listener, you'll be aware that I've been trying to sort a date with Jamie to record an episode. About 6 or 7 weeks ago, I was an hour and a half away from his home up in Liverpool, and he phoned me up just to say that he wasn't feeling too good and can we set a new date. But unfortunately, I guess fate had other plans. So, whatever world you happen to have gone to, I'm sure you're already being a pain in the side to whoever's in charge of it. But anyway, back to today's episode. This episode, featuring Jessica Worrall, was recorded back in April. At that time, I recorded several in a very short period because I knew I'd be doing quite a lot of them for Kensington and Chelsea. Let me just find who I've got put aside and I'll let you know. Right, we have Jessica Worrall, which is today. Damien Priestley, good one. The Cameron Twins, Lee Wagstaff, Don't Walk Walk Gallery, Piers Secunda, Alison Jackson, and we've got a couple of bonus episodes coming up, which I'll tell you about those as and when they're released. But yes, today, Jessica Worrall. I first saw Jessica's work a couple of years ago, and her visual art journey sort of started during lockdown, and she's one of those who properly hit the road running. And if you don't know her work, well, actually, if you don't know her work, then just listen to this episode because she explains it a lot better than I do. All I will say is that she beautifully merges 17th and 18th century high society with 21st century fashion, which are mainly available as A3 prints, which I should add are all available over on her Etsy page, and they start from £55. Can't go wrong. That said, come and join me as I speak to Jessica Worrall. How are you? You good?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, very good. So I'm always nervous when I talk about my work, but hopefully I'll be okay.
Man, that'll go. Everyone says that goes when they chat to me because I've got no airs and graces.
That's a man after my own heart then.
First of all, Jessica, I do have 7 questions.
Mm-hmm.
And the very first is, how would you describe what you do to someone that didn't know your work?
Well, I guess I work in terms of my artwork because I have 2 separate careers. I work as a theatre designer, but I also work as a collage artist, and that's what we're talking about today. So my collage work is basically looking at women's identity, I guess. It looks at how the kind of female form has been represented in kind of art, but also in kind of fashion, and how those ideals, I suppose, of like femininity and what we think of as being kind of the ideals of femininity have kind of evolved or changed or not, sort of when you look at the history of art into kind of modern kind of fashion. And how it kind of manifests itself is I make these collage works that put kind of portraits from, say, sort of 14th, 15th, 16th century together with modern day kind of couture, to kind of create this new kind of like, I guess, sort of persona, or just to ask those questions, really. I'm not kind of making any kind of definitive sort of like statement about it. I'm just asking questions about the fact that when you look at those portraits of women from before, and you look at a lot of kind of fashion from today, it's all male generated. Like the majority of it is basically a male depiction. And so I'm interested in how that affects, as women, we see ourselves and think about ourselves. So I guess that's the kind of core of my work.
Yeah. Well, when you see them 16th, 17th century paintings, a lot of the time it will be Lady Anna Jenkinson, wife of, and it's they've hardly ever got their own bit of identity, have they?
I mean, a lot of them, and I find them and they make me so angry where it just goes wife of. So they're defined basically as the kind of wife of. So, and you get this when you think and you look into it, you see that women, you know, until kind of 1880 weren't allowed to own property.
Yeah.
So I go into that kind of history, I guess, a kind of female sort of like emancipation, I guess, in that way, that a lot of those portraits were painted as status symbols. And they were painted either commissioned by the father, who had a daughter who he wanted to marry off into a wealthy family.
Yeah.
She was his property, or they're painted
Hence
by
the
the
giving
husband.
away.
The husband, yeah, and it's the husband, or they're the husband to commemorate the marriage and go, look at this beautiful wife that's now married into, who's now going to give me all these male heirs who are going to perpetuate this sort of line. And I make a link between that, I guess, and how I suppose a lot of kind of fashion nowadays, you know, they were status symbols, those portraits were status symbols at the time. And so when you look at kind of fashion now, it's still, I mean, it's much, much better, but it still enforces a certain sense of how a female should be and look, and that she's judged in how she looks and in how attractive she is.
Yeah.
So it's selling us these kind of ideals. So to me, they kind of, there's a conversation to be had between the two, and these images that are created like 400 or 500 years, you know, apart. And I'm kind of interested in whether when I redress them, whether it changes what we think about the women, whether it changes how we see them. Do we see them more as individuals, or are we still seeing them through that kind of male gaze, I guess? That makes sense.
Definitely. I mean, you said that you've got two different worlds or two different lives within the creative world. If we go back further, even before those worlds come about, did you have creativity in the home growing up?
I mean, I suppose in terms of, I have my own imagination, which I have, you know, apparently, according to my mother, from a very but
that sounded like you've been told that several times.
It's interesting. I mean, my mother was creative and was definitely artistic, but she gave all that up to have children, and she's only just gone back to it. When she was about 65, she started painting again. But that was literally like, she was like, you know, sort of 17 when she just stopped making art. And my family are kind of working class. So, I mean, there was books and stuff, and there's a kind of an awareness of kind of art and stuff, but it wasn't like, you know, I'm not from that kind of background where it's sort of there. And I grew up in a small village in kind of Yorkshire. Well, I moved around quite a lot actually because of family stuff. But when I was at school, I was the only person doing A-level art at my school.
Oh, wow.
So it literally was, they ran the course for me to do it.
Where was you at that point?
That was in North Yorkshire, in Pickering. And so it's a small kind of country school. And I mean, wasn't that many people even kind of in sixth form. There's maybe like 30 of us. And I'm literally the only one doing A-level art. And then I did a foundation. So I always knew that I wanted to work in the arts, but I knew I would have to leave where I lived to do it, because I couldn't do it there.
So if there was a sort of almost aesthetic vacuum, if you like, in the village that you was living in, how did that feel for you? Did that give you pressures, or was it a bit of freedom that it was just your thing?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question, actually. I think because I always read as well, because I was massively a big fan of sort of literature and stuff. So it was an escapism for me. And so it was another reality, I guess, that I knew that I wanted to be part of. So that kind of world of the imagination and what that was something that I was really lucky, I think, that I knew it from a very, very early age, that I wasn't going to be like everybody else. I don't mean that in a dismissive way, but that I was going to do something else. And very different to my brothers as well. I mean, they're creative in different ways. My younger brother's a joiner. I mean, the most beautiful carpenter. So there's that sense of, but I always knew that I was going to leave and I was going to do something. And I was really, really lucky that my mum and my stepdad just completely supported that.
Good.
and we're like, off you go, you have to, that's what you are, that's who you are. There was never any friction about that. I mean, they always thought I was a bit of a weirdo, but they didn't know me. And I still, if I go
You're
to
not
the
the
pub,
first to say that.
if I go to the pub in the village, they'll go, have you got a proper job yet? It's still that kind of thing where you go, because they're all farmers, and
Of course.
and they're the most beautiful people you could.
They've all got proper jobs.
They've all got proper jobs. Yeah. So and I just play along with it, because we all but they love, they love what I do, and they'll come and see stuff now. Like my family started going to the theatre once I started working in theatre, and now we kiss each other and everything.
Oh, there you go.
I kind of introduced lovely kind of like behaviour into my family.
It rubs off on them. Brilliant.
Job well done.
What happened after sixth form?
I went to York, and I did a foundation course in art and design.
Nice.
And then you basically chose what you're going to do your degree in. And I had that thing, and I think this is quite key for me, was I didn't feel strong enough or vocational enough, or that I knew enough to go and be a fine artist. I just didn't feel that I had that vocabulary or knowledge, or what fine art was, that it was too far away from me. So I did theatre because it combined literature, and because it combined, kind of creativity. And I felt that was kind of quite a good fix for me, sort of at where I was at that point. And I love fashion, and I love, kind of scenery, and I mean, just all of it. I love all the kind of elements of it. But it was definitely influenced by the fact that I just didn't have a clue. Like when I went to foundation, I realized that I knew nothing. What I thought I knew nothing. And then when I went to Trent Polytechnic to do theatre design, I realised even the stuff that I'd learned, I still knew nothing. You
generally find that, don't you?
I had none of the terminology, and I just felt, I think at least 6 months before I felt that I had a grip on it.
I mean, I felt like that when I got into fine art, if you like, and I was trying to learn, because it's not just about the technique, as you said there. It's about your circle of friends and the people you associate with.
I just didn't know how to talk to people or anything. And I met people who, their mums were painters and photographers, and they're architects, and, they had a beautiful house in Notting Hill. And I just was like, I mean, I've had imposter syndrome all my life.
Of course.
But it was quite tricky for me, I think, to kind of find how I fitted into all of that kind of thing, sort of with it. So it was, and I would just run back to the village and try and kind of ground myself in what I knew, and then go, okay, I can go back again now.
Back to your safe space,
exactly. And it still is, because it still is where my mum lives, and it is my safe place, where I go to kind of go, oh, I can exhale.
Well, since I've been recording this podcast, I coined a little phrase. Well, I think I coined it. I hope I didn't read it somewhere and, just taking it as my own. I've said that those that don't have imposter syndrome are the imposters, because everyone's got it. And you get those confident people who just come in and start talking about art, and you go, oh, that's brilliant. Then you speak to them a little bit more and you think, oh, hold on a minute, they've just read a lot of books, and they've not really got their own understanding of it.
I mean, I still have it where, I guess, because in terms of, I suppose theatre is very hierarchical. When I've worked in theatre, it's very hierarchical, but there's a lot of kind of academics and stuff within it. And also my partner's an artist, and so we know a lot of kind of artists, and some of them are, kind of quite academical. And I have that thing where I always think I'm really intelligent. I am intelligent. But as soon as I speak to someone who's like doing a doctorship or an MA or something like that, I literally go, I have no thoughts. I know exactly I'm not coherent. And it's like, that's why I get nervous about this, because I go, how do I talk about my work? But I know I'm really passionate about it, and I know that I can be eloquent, but I can't always make it when it needs to be.
Do you think that's that sort of working class thing of having to sort of, we think we're slightly talking up to someone? And because you can't blag someone who's got a doctorate in that subject, can you?
Exactly. And I think also they're just going to see through me and go, what do you think you're doing? You probably should go and get a proper job.
So how did you get into theatre from doing your degree?
basically, I was really lucky that I was offered some work from my degree show at college. So that was in Nottingham. So I moved down to London. So I lived in London for the first sort of maybe 5 or 6 years of my career. It was quite tough actually, because it was sort of, early 90s. And it was that thing of you would be doing you'd been in costume making or prop making or stuff like that for other shows, or assisting other designers, and then trying to kind of get your own work sort of like seen and kind of like produced and stuff. So and it's always been kind of freelance in that way. And so I think for the first sort of few years, I was always like really borderline, like kind of struggling in terms of not knowing if I was going to make it, not knowing if I was going to be able to make a career, like an absolute kind of career out of it. I mean, I was really poor for a long time. But I was very, very kind of focused. I was I knew it was what I wanted to do. So I just kind of gave it, what I could. And again, I had support of my mum and my stepdad, so that was like amazing as well. They would send me little food parcels and things. I mean, they did have like, I would have like 20 quid for like 2 weeks, and I don't know how I'm going to eat, so they would send me sort of food and stuff down. But then bit by bit, I just kind of started getting more work and be kind of getting more known and stuff, and it's just kind of continued since then, really. And until just sort of before lockdown, I was really lucky that I got to a point. I mean, I've been working for quite a few years, many years now, but my theatre career, I only designed stuff. I didn't have to do anything else. That was enough for me to kind of live on and stuff. So the last things I sort of did before I was at the Globe, to Shakespeares Globe for a while. I've done about 4 or 5 there, like in the Globe and in the Wanamaker. And it was lovely. I mean, that's a beautiful place to work, because it's just such an amazing building, and they've got an amazing setup there, and the talent of the production crew there is just amazing, like the skills that they have. So it's really nice sort of doing that. But and then obviously COVID happened and lockdown, and all my work was cancelled, as with most people kind of in theatre and kind of like events or kind of entertainment. So I had work lined up for like a year and a half or something, and everything kind of went. So I started making the collages in lockdown.
And was it an idea that you'd had before, or did you just create it?
Not really. I mean, I've been moving towards wanting to make some personal work, because again, I have a problem with like hierarchies and also as well as the kind of mainstream work in theatre, I do a lot of kind of devising work. So I used to work with a collective called People Show, who were kind of formed in the 60s, and they basically, you make work out of just whatever, really. And it's more kind of performative, sort of experimental work, and they work in a very kind of non-hierarchical way, and I sort of always have really, really enjoyed that, and it's always been really important to me, sort of working that kind of way. I've been thinking more and more that I just need, I turned 50, and I kind of just wanted to I was thinking about whether I wanted to just carry on in the way I was going, or whether I wanted to do something kind of else, that see what else you're capable of. Because my theatre work all exists within somebody else's parameters, whether it's the parameters of the play or the director or the budget or all those things. It always exists within those parameters. So I was on the internet one day, like in lockdown, and I saw this David Bowie interview where he talks about being an artist, and he talks about, if you feel as an artist that you're facilitating someone else's vision, then you're not being the artist that you could be. And so I just was like, and it kind of triggered something with me. And alongside that, I basically, my 15-year-old niece was well, she was 14 then. She was doing art, homeschooling, because obviously she was at home, kind of home learning. And so I would do her art lesson with her on, we would just FaceTime and do art and stuff. And one of them was, we just made a collage one day, and it literally was these kind of like things that happened where I just went, there's something in that. And it definitely, in terms of my interest, it definitely comes out of the way that I design costume, because my style is very anachronistic. I don't do like historical representation. I always put different periods and things together. And so it's definitely an extension of that. And also my kind of, interest in kind of class and power and status. and female identity. So it kind of just all just came together, and I just started playing. I gave myself kind of permission just to play with some ideas, and lockdown gave me that space.
And how long before that, the initial idea come together? Would the rough images be the first ones you done?
The rough ones. Well, I did some other stuff actually that were a little bit more kind of like little theatre sets, which I haven't shown. So I started those, and that was maybe just a couple of weeks, month or something.
Would that be just because you're keeping in your own safe bubble and using stuff that you already know? Brilliant. Yeah. Brilliant.
And I was just like, I just need to do something creative because none of us were doing anything. So I just started playing, and then it just sort of snowballed. And I work quite quickly once I kind of get into something. I get very like kind of involved in it. So I think I had the first sort of rough ones maybe 3 months, like 2-3 months kind of after, because I was just generating a lot of work. I mean, I was literally going to the printers every day and getting things printed and cutting them up and whatever. And when I kind of realized that there was something sort of happening, I applied for some funding from Creative Scotland, because they had an open fund where it literally was for people whose whole creative kind of like outlet had gone to try new ideas. So it was an open fund. So I applied for some of that. And I actually, it's really interesting because that's my imposter syndrome, that I asked one of my friends who teaches at the Glasgow Art School if she would mentor me through it, because I felt I wanted that sort of nurturing kind of, and I needed that to kind of make me feel that it was valid what I was doing. And she was brilliant, because she was very like, this works, this doesn't work, what's this is how I read this. So it was kind of having that sort of dialogue, and it literally just kind of went from that. And I'd made quite a lot through that. And then I think it was October 21 when I first did an Instagram post with one of them. And that was a really big thing for me, because before I just had them at home, and then I was looking at them and I'd sort of show them to some friends, and they go, well, these are quite good. And I'd be like, oh, you just saying that, and you're just being nice. And then I started to kind of think, do you know what? I think there's something here. And that's when I made the decision to make an Instagram page for them, because I knew I didn't want to put them in a gallery system, because I didn't want to go from hierarchical theatre into hierarchical gallery system. And it gave me a kind of anonymity that I could just share them and didn't have to be, I wasn't, the kind of public visible thing. And I do a lot of kind of captions with them where I explain my thought process. And that's a huge part of the work, where I explain what the images are that I'm working with and why I'm interested with them and what the kind of conversation I'm trying to have. Instagram just allowed me to do that. And then it just kind of went push. It just moved from there, really.
It must have been around maybe Christmas 21 when I first come across them.
Yeah, it was kind of, because I think it was quite low key stuff. It coincided with my stepfather dying. So basically things went a little bit pear-shaped then. And kind of, as a family we're still trying to kind of recover from that. But in a way, it also gave me an escape. I could do something. So I would just be making them. I was back in Appleton then, in the village, looking after my mum. So I would just make them there. So I just started making them and then posting them, making them, posting them, making them, posting them. And I think, and I watched loads of YouTube videos on how to get an Instagram following. I had to like a lot of, we have to like works and you have to engage, but I could do it there, and it gave me a focus outside of all the grief and everything. And then it was kind of post-Christmas, I think, where suddenly it did start kind of picking, it just went a bit crazy on Instagram, and like Schiaparelli, one of the kind of fashion houses, shared it, and Gautier, another one of the fashion houses, sort of shared it. That it kind of started to get this kind of validation, which was amazing for me, from some of the kind of people whose material I was looking at.
Nice. Well, I've always liked works from two separate centuries, if you like, come together. If you see, there might be a Shakespeare play, but done in an urban environment. Yeah, that's always appealed to me anyway. And then when I saw your work, it did feel like it didn't feel like it was from a new visual artist, if you like. It did feel like it was from an artist that has been working for forever, and it was what they was doing at the moment. Yeah, it appealed
Yeah, I
to you
guess
straight
it's.
away.
I mean, for me, it definitely relates to my theatre work, and it definitely relates to all of that kind of like experience that I have from sort of working with costume and seeing how costume affects people, and also how particularly women look to costume to somehow transform them or make them into something that they think they need to be, and just that language of clothing, and so it's definitely coming out of all of that. It's a much more kind of personal sort of body of work for me, and it's been, I had no sense, when I started doing it, of whether it was just something I just did, so I didn't have any sense that it would grow into what it has now. And then, because obviously now I sell prints of the work and stuff, and I've just had some more funding, so I've just done this big body of work called The Shaping of Beauty, which was on billboards, like advertising hoardings in Glasgow and Edinburgh and Dundee, because I wanted it on the streets. I don't want to go into a gallery and hide it away. I want people to be able to see it, and see it in public. And that's my kind of class thing. I think that I feel that art should be available for everybody. And you shouldn't need to feel that you have to walk into a gallery to see it. You should be able to see it for free anywhere.
Yeah. Once you'd agreed to come on, I went to the start of your Instagram page.
Oh, did you?
And you had the rough version there.
Yeah.
And there was, I think, I don't know, 8 or 10 images of it. And they was all black, which I didn't know whether you was trying to stay safe or you was just doing a project of everyone wearing black. And then after that, you had an explosion of colour with lady wearing blue.
The black is really interesting because that actually references the original portraits. So because you would always basically in those original portraits, the ruff, that sort of amazing sort of status symbol itself is nearly always worn with black.
Oh, okay.
So it basically references, what would be the modern day equivalent of what those outfits were from those original portraits. So they're kind of styled to basically echo how the original portraits look.
Okay. Thank you very much for explaining.
Black fabric itself is a kind of status symbol because I reference a lot of the sumptuary laws, which I talk about. So basically, only certain classes were allowed to wear certain colours. So the peasants, that's why you're all in the drab browns, and they're using the inexpensive, kind of vegetable dyes. The rich classes are using, the ground up insects and whatever that costs, they have to be imported and whatever. So their fabrics are much more kind of opulent. And there was these laws. I mean, I don't talk about Western Europe here, but from sort of 14th to sort of 16th century, that basically you could be fined if you dressed above your station. And I just find that like horrifying. But then you go, but what is a designer label now if it's not that?
Oh, I totally agree.
So that's the kind of references sort of with it. So that kind of bright red or that royal blue, it literally, we're talking nobility. Purple, only royalty. Still today you think of it, of those colors, like, and that's from ancient Rome, to kind of now. So that history of clothing and how we use it to kind of enforce certain ideals of identity and status. I'm just really fascinated by that. And so the black is it's kind of part and parcel of that, really.
When you mentioned that your stepfather had passed at that time, I only brought that up just then because I didn't know whether it was a thing that you was dealing with, not confident to put colour into it, or it was like a mourning. I didn't know whether you was bringing the mourning into it.
Oh, that's so sweet. Yeah, that's really interesting. No, if it was a subconscious thing, but I think for me it was always about looking at the original paintings that those roughs are from, and they're from a kind of very austere kind of era of kind of clothing. So they're mainly sort of late 15th, early 16th sort of century, which almost kind of develops into the kind of Puritan look. But that black cloth it's very present. When you think of like a Rembrandt portrait or something like that, it's kind of all sort of, from those kind of ones, really, or a lot of those Dutch kind of golden age. Consciously, I thought I was kind of referencing those because I wanted to find the modern equivalent sort of with it. And then the color stuff, that literally was because I started looking at slightly earlier portraits from the kind of early Renaissance. And then you get kind of, obviously cloth is still used, or color is still used as a status symbol, but it allowed me to widen the scope of the art that I was referencing in terms of depictions of women, sort of from the kind of, a lot from the kind of Italian Renaissance.
Yeah, because when I first saw them, on Instagram on my phone. So you're looking at less than
Yeah,
a
yeah.
postage stamp size image. I thought that you had painted over the top of a painting.
Oh, I see. I can paint, but I can't paint that well.
But that's what I thought you'd done. I thought you'd
No,
got an
I'm
old
just
painting or print and
I'm
just
just a magpie.
painting
I'm
over the
just a
top.
magpie. I just get these bits together and stitch them together in a new way.
Well, it wasn't until I saw someone wearing a lot of lace. She had, I think it was one of the black ones,
Yeah.
with a ruff. She had a lace top on.
Ah,
And I
okay.
thought, my God, that's a really good bit of painting. And I zoomed in and I was like, oh, what a fool. Fancy me thinking that, I duped myself.
Well, I mean, part of in a way is I am referencing those
Oh,
paintings.
definitely.
So
No,
it is
I'm
what
not
you
knocking it
said.
in any way.
I would be quite prolific, wouldn't I, if I'd made that many of them, painted all those roughs and stuff. I'm like, blimey, she's quick.
Well, Jessica, which piece that you've created has got the strongest emotional connection?
Oh my gosh, it's really hard because I think of them as a body of work. So I kind of think of them as a whole. So it's the ones that I have on my wall at home is I have the Caravaggio with the Gautier. It's the yellow one.
Yeah.
Because Caravaggio is one of my favorite artists.
Yeah.
I love what Caravaggio did, that he would, his models for these kind of saints and stuff were basically people that he got off the streets and
Yeah,
the
brilliant.
courtesans and whatever. And so he was sort of, putting things together that shocked people. So I like kind of being able to reference that kind of in
Yeah.
that one. So I really, really like that piece. But it's really hard for me to pick them because I think of them all as a kind of continuation of the same thing. So they don't necessarily exist as individual pieces for me.
Your body of work as sort of, you was learning yourself as you started, I
Oh God, yeah,
presume.
totally.
So is there any specific ones that you were doing that while you was doing them, it gave you an understanding of what your subconscious was trying to tell you, if you like? Did you get any feedback from your own work to go, oh, this is what I'm trying to say?
Maybe some of the first rough ones would, because I was, it was just really interesting that, because I was doing some other stuff when I was just messing around with stuff before, with kind of putting them into kind of environments, almost trying to make a little theatre set. So I realized that what I was doing was kind of making little, kind of scenes or scenarios or something. And that was I think sometimes that's me just having to do more to try and kind of make it seem like it means more or something. And then I stripped it away and just went, it's literally just about the figure in space, and the clothing, obviously. And so I think maybe the first couple of rough ones that I made, I just went, oh yeah, this is it. This is it. They first had a much more kind of textured background because I was playing with scale. And then I basically simplified that down to it being really kind of dark. Because I wanted them to feel like how when you stand in front of one of those paintings, you just feel like the figures looming out kind of at you. Yeah, I think when I realized that I had to do less, I didn't have to kind of overdo it.
Well, even going back to your theatre life, where you've taken away the background, it is like a solo figure on stage, just in the spotlight, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly that. And kind of knowing that that's enough. And I think that's something that I guess my experience has sort of told me in that way of like, don't be too precious about an idea, or don't be too precious about, I don't think you have to do too much. It's sort of, sometimes it's just being confident that you can just be really have quite a light touch with something.
Well, when you first come up with a concept, your initial thought is to try and tell the viewer everything that you're thinking at the moment.
Exactly.
And that's just inundating them with visual information, when really, like you just say, scale back, and let them have some room to think for themselves.
Exactly. I think it's so good, that because it's so important that you allow space for the viewer. And that's something I learned through design, because when I first started, I was just throwing stuff at it like, notice me. Look at my amazing concept. Just think how brilliant my mind is. And it's rubbish. It just was like less is more kind of with it.
Definitely.
So now I'm more like, if I can get rid of something, I'll get rid of it. I've allowed myself, I guess, sort of to be a bit more brutal about some of those kind of choices and stuff. And I know when they don't work. I mean, it takes me quite a while to find the right face or the right outfit or the right kind of marriage between the kind of images, and where you feel that then it becomes an entity in itself. it's really lovely. And sometimes I can see a portrait and think I need to find something for that, but it'll take me a while to kind of, or I just have it kind of there, thinking one day I'll see an outfit that will suit that person. And it's been an amazing kind of learning curve, because I've learned so much about art history, about history of women, kind of how they're depicted in history of art, and also thinking about kind of the history of fashion and stuff. So it sort of blows my mind that I can learn so much kind of while making it. And I think I just try and share some of that knowledge as I'm doing it, rather than it being about what I think. It's about what I'm trying to find out, I guess.
Yeah. Well, when you're comparing these two pictures of society, or women in society, from the 21st century and from the 16th or 17th, even earlier sometimes, you are asking the viewer to look at that woman in her society 500 years ago and compare her to today's woman, and some of the expectations of society and of women against other women, of men onto women.
Yeah,
some of them
exactly.
are still being asked 500 years later,
That's the biggest thing for me, Gary. It's just like, they would go, why are we still asking these questions? We're still asking these same questions, as women, as men, all of us, we're still asking these same questions of how do we fit? Who are we? Kind of in kind of life, I guess. Or are you kind of in control of yourself in terms of the decisions that you make? Are you making them, or are they kind of in a way by osmosis being made by things that you see or things that are expected, and all of those? I mean, they're kind of age-old conundrums, aren't they?
I was sitting on a train a couple of years, long before COVID, maybe 2016 or something, and I heard a girl who was possibly 17, 18, with very probably a grandmother who was, I don't know, late 60s or something. The nan was telling the daughter about the tights in the 40s, putting gravy granules on your legs and putting a line up the back. And the daughter was saying to the nan about ladies' makeup and lipstick and rouge, and how that goes back into centuries. And the granddaughter was going, but why are we still doing it? Why are we doing this on our lips to try and make them rosy, and our cheeks to make us look blushed? And she was saying to the nan that the women used to do it to please the male. And she was asking her nan the question, are women doing it to please each other now, or are we still doing it for men, or just because it's a societal thing? And it was a great conversation between a skipped generation, if you like. But yeah, it was fascinating, and I would love to have heard more of it.
That is kind of like my work in a nutshell, really. Conversation. It's just like, that is it. There's a perfect example, and it's fascinating, that kind of dialogue, kind of with it. Brilliant.
Right, Jessica, if there was you and 5 other artists, past and present, what would your ideal group show be?
I mean, what a question that is. Does anybody actually successfully manage to answer this?
Yeah, but most say it would be different tomorrow than what it is today.
Well, it would be. Well, I would probably have Caravaggio, because I mentioned him already. And then I would probably, the thing is, this is going to be really influenced by the work that I'm making, I think. Because I would probably want something like a Caravaggio and some kind of golden age portrait, maybe a Rembrandt or a Picquenoy or something like that. But then I'd probably want it with some Louise Borgia.
Nice.
Like work with that, because those are the artists that I like. So I would put things together that probably didn't kind of go together. So Louise Borgia, I don't know. Louise Borgia and Caravaggio. I mean, what more do you need?
It does feel like that, doesn't it? Putting the worlds together, even a Vivienne Westwood thrown in there, possibly.
Well, exactly. And I would probably want a little bit of couture in there as well, sort of something like that. So it wouldn't be a kind of necessarily be an art show. Yeah. So you'd maybe want that, and then you'd maybe want to show In the Mood for Love or something like that as a film. Nice. So you'd kind of have, and maybe have a band playing. So it's sort of not just one art form. I like to kind of the idea of different art forms all together, and it would be free.
Perfect. And if you wasn't an artist, what do you think you'd like to be?
I always wanted to be a writer when I was younger. I would have loved, I've tried to write, but it's just dreadful.
What have you tried to write?
Yeah, I've tried to write stuff before.
So what would it be? Novels or poems?
Yeah, novels. Yeah, I wanted to be a Bronte when I was younger. So I'm always obsessed with the Brontes. So I don't want to die tragically young, because obviously we would be having this conversation because I'd be dead.
Is there any one particular Bronte that stands out for you?
Well, I love them all because they're all just so different. But I love, not Bramwell, but I love Anne because of her. She's so underrated, that everyone always talks about Emily and Charlotte. I mean, Emily's like, I reread Wuthering Heights maybe every sort of 5 or 10 years, and every time I read it, it destroys me. And Charlotte is just extraordinary. But Anne, when you see the sort of progression from her first book to her second book, it's amazing. And she was working, the other two were at home and all in Brussels and stuff. So I just think she's really underrated, because I think she's the youngest, and she's treated like that she's the youngest, but she's really strong, like really strong. So I really like The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. I think that's a very underrated book.
And fancy being the younger sister to those two, like, what sort of wake have you got to try and swim in,
Yeah, but I think they kind of worked as a triumvirate in a way.
Definitely.
I feel like the three of them sort of together. Because it was Emily and Anne were the ones that were really, really close. And Charlotte was sort of friends with Branwell, and then she fell out with him because he was slightly dissipated. What with the opium and the many a session in the Black Bull. So
well, there you go.
But they're extraordinary. They're extraordinary. I love them. There might just be the romance of it as well, though. That. I don't know why an early violent death is romantic.
Though we're speaking in mid to late April, and this may not be out for a while, have you got anything coming up in either world, to be honest?
I'm actually, because I just finished my Shaping of Beauty project, the one that was the billboard one. So that's literally just finished. So I'm going to have a little bit of sort of studio time to kind of work on where I'm going next. Nice. And in the meantime, I'm actually doing a theatre play. So I'm actually back doing my day job, designing a show, which is going to be at Pitlochry and the Lyceum in Edinburgh.
Nice.
So that starts rehearsing in July and opens in August. So I'm literally in the midst of just designing that. And it's a new piece by a playwright called Peter Arnott, and it's about Scottish identity. And set just before the first Scottish referendum. So I think it's going to be really interesting. And it's a kind of Chekhovian sort of family kind of sort of drama. But yeah, that's really interesting. So I'm literally just designing that. I'm trying to remember how to do theatre design.
Jessica, where can people find you, be it website or social media?
Instagram is Jessica Worrall Digital Collage, and my website is jessicaworrall.co.uk, and I also have an Etsy shop where I sell limited edition prints of my work, and that's JW Collage, I think, on Etsy. Excellent. But all the links are on either my Instagram, or I think they're on my website. Mainly everything kind of goes through Instagram really these days. So I would just head to Instagram and you should find them.
How big are your prints?
They go from, they're mainly A3 up to A1. So it kind of varies really. So I do some A4, but it's not all the work. It's just some that I've kind of selected. Yeah. But the bigger ones are the A1 ones. But most of the time, it's the A3 or the A2.
And do you have physical exhibitions of your work other than like the ones you've got on the billboards?
No, not yet. I have to think about that, because I just have to think about the context of that, because I sometimes what I would really like to do is to have one of my pieces of work next to the original painting that I've taken the portrait from. Yeah. Nice. That would be really nice, kind of, if you could have that sort of sense of the presence of it. Or like if you have the female portrait of mine next to the male portrait, a lot of those portraits, I use a marriage portrait, so they're in a pair. So the man's allowed to look out at the viewer, the woman has to look dutifully to the husband. Yeah. So it's like, all of that. So I'm kind of interested in that. But I think that might be, I need to get some more connections before that'll happen.
And would the bottom half of the mail be brought into the 21st century?
No, man
Right,
stays in the
course.
past.
Yeah.
I feel like it's very much about the female to me. So I have to think about kind of the context of kind of showing stuff, but I loved the billboard thing that I did because the scale of it is really good for me. I loved seeing the work kind of on that scale. And I do like it being out in public in that way. So in terms of putting them in an exhibition, I just have to kind of work out how I would make that work for me.
Well, the beautiful thing about your work is the questions can be asked by several different groups or types of people. So it can be looking, like you said, at women in society, women looking at women, the male-female balance.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes I think it'd be nice to kind of, I sort of like commission an essay to go with it and stuff like that. So you're kind of looking at it kind of, in different contexts and things. So I don't ever want it to be a definitive thing, because I think the context that it's shown in changes how you see the work, but also, kind of what the work is kind of provoking, I guess, as well. So it's not that I'm not open to it being kind of shown in a gallery. It's just, it would have to be a very particular kind of space where you would feel that it's not being shown as a commodity. It's being shown as something that's a provocation, I guess.
Your work is almost the visual essay on its own, isn't it? You're asking the questions and the viewer is
I hope so. I hope it's a conversation that the viewer can have kind of with the images. I mean, and I hope it doesn't mean that I'm failing to, because I'm not providing any answers, that somehow that's kind of, but I think it's all there. It's just open to interpretation with it. Which in a way, that's how we all look at art. We all kind of, we look at it in a personal kind of way, and how we look at it is affected by what we know and what we don't know, or how open we are, or how we think, or whether we look at it to validate what we want, what we think we want to think about something, or whether we're open to it provoking something new. So it's all different, really, isn't it?
Superb. Right, well, I look forward to what's coming next, Jessica.
Thank you. I when I know, I'll let you know.
You'll let us all know.
I'll let you know. So I mean, it's nice actually, because I just want to just see what else happens sort of with it.
It's
but
nice
I literally have no idea what that is going to be.
I like the idea that conceptually, with any artist, they feel like they're pushing a car up to the top of a hill. At some point they get to the top, and then it's got to the point now where you've sort of gone the other side, and it's got a little bit of a will of its own. You're in control to an extent, but you're not entirely sure where it's going.
That's exactly it. And it's just I think with anything good like that, the work starts to say what it needs to say, sort of for you or to you, and you kind of go, okay, so where do I need to take this? And so you're sort of in control, but sort of not. But it's just allowing yourself that space to kind of feel a bit frightened. That, oh my God, maybe I won't have another idea. But no,
I've thought that so many times.
Yeah, I think we all do it, but it's really good just to kind of going, okay, it's good to just feel frightened.
Good
see
feeling.
What happens.
Perfect way to end. Jessica, thank you very much for your time.
It's been a pleasure, an absolute pleasure. So yes, thank you so much for making me feel so at ease and so at home. It's been
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Ministry of Arts podcast. It's a podcast that's produced with the help of the listener. And if you like what you've heard and you think you might be able to give a little support, there's two ways in which you can do it. If you go over to the Ministry of Arts Instagram profile, you'll find a Linktree drop-down box. And in that box, you'll find two links. One is called Buy Us a Coffee, and it's pretty much that. You can make a one-off payment, the price of a cup of coffee. Or, if you're able and want to do it more long-term, you can become a Ministry of Arts Patreon, where you can sign up to support us on a monthly basis. And 100% of your support goes back into the podcast. And if you're not able to do that, that's absolutely fine. This content is free for everyone. But we would urge you to follow us on your socials and show us a bit of love that way. Either way, thanks for listening and see you next time. Ta-da.